Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. As always, we're presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Michigan winning Big Ten title number 45. That is 3 in a row. And Michigan returning to the Granddaddy of Them All, the Rose Bowl. Greg, can you feel it?
I can feel it, Steve.
I can feel it down in my plums.
I could still feel a little bit from this weekend. I'm still reeling a little bit, just the magnitude of what's kind of happened here, like big picture, man. I think you feel me, right? We started having this Big Ten championship in 2011, and we saw 7 other teams, I counted today, several trips from Michigan State, obviously a bunch of trips from Ohio State.
It was just a few years ago where people who hate Michigan would constantly point out, as Michigan one of the few teams left in the Big Ten not to make an appearance in Indianapolis. And now they are dominating like no other.
But 5 other teams make this trip. We saw pictures, we heard stories, we heard radio pundits talk about their trips to St. Elmo's to get the shrimp cocktail. We never had a literal taste of any of this. And to get it 3 times in the span of basically 2 years since the first trip, it's remarkable that this has happened. I've enjoyed every minute of it. You see fans who now have a familiarity with Indianapolis because of this weekend. We recognize people and faces, which we'll talk about today. I'm still loving it. I'm still feeling it, and I take none of it for granted.
So Jim Harbaugh now doing what no other coach has ever done in the 13-year history of the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, and that is wins 3 in a row. Now, Greg, we're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about the playoff controversy that happened between Florida State and Alabama. We're going to talk about the transfer portal. So just keep listening through this long podcast. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and I got to say, boy, we have a lot to talk about over the coming weeks. So please, thank you. Again, another record episode, Steve. Please follow. Please share with your friends. Please connect with us. This is going to be a fun time. When we signed up to do this, we're hoping this would be the outcome, that we'd be talking all the way up through, say, the Rose Bowl in particular. And here we are. Even one of our ads with Nick Hopwood that we just played was a metaphorical savings for the Rose Bowl, right, with our sponsor. And here we are. So pinch us.
Yeah.
Pinch
so
us.
Apple Podcasts, tell us about that. Google, Spotify, and Autograph, which has joined the family.
You can get us wherever you can find your podcasts. We've had over 60,000 now listens across all platforms, over 500 followers and growing. We picked up a bunch of new listeners, saw a bunch of our listeners in Indianapolis, by the way. Thank you for those who came up and said hi and gave us the love. And then, yes, you can find us on the Autograph app. The link is in the show notes. Use code Prof Pun. And saw some of our friends from Autograph, by the way, in Indy. So thank you guys. They gave us the Michigan versus everybody wristbands, which I'm still wearing because I won't take it off. And now that's like a good luck charm.
Right. I got one for every member of the family, but I dished out a whole bunch at the Slippery Noodle Inn. So how did this play out for you between Iowa and Michigan? Because, over the course of November, there was the Penn State game, which was completely different from the Maryland game, which was completely different from the Ohio State game. How did you see this one?
It played out kind of exactly like I figured it would play out, short of Iowa kind of getting that punt block or that punt return or that fumble or that tipped pass interception. They never got to really eat. And then their offense was as advertised. Deacon Hill is an absolute beast of a man. But they had to fight and earn every single inch, and we didn't give them a dime. We knew they weren't like a threat down the field. So it kind of played out like I thought. The nice part was we kind of did some of the things they do to them, right? And that was a cool thing.
There wasn't a whole lot of film that Michigan showed to any of their opponents coming up. Michigan did what I thought they would. They got out to the lead, and then they resisted the temptation to being greedy. you play into their hands if you think you're just going to feast and you lose gap responsibility, or you decide, look, this is a team I think we can do a 70-yard touchdown strike. Let's give that play a try. And that's when they intercept the ball, and that's when they make things happen.
No, I love that line, the temptation to be greedy, because that's what I was going to wondering. Like, do we get a little cute? Do we get a little greedy? And they never really did. We kicked field goals when we needed to. We just did the right things, and we didn't try to bite off more than, say, we could chew or get into, like, a triple reverse with a pass. We didn't really need to do it. And I'm so glad we did. We did what we needed to do to win. So yeah. I love that line because that's a perfect way to play.
Thank you.
Steve. Yeah.
So Iowa did have a few calls not go their way. There was the potential roughing the passer penalty that wasn't called that would have put the Hawkeyes in the red zone. And then obviously the big turnover deep in Iowa territory that was initially ruled an incomplete pass and then turned into a fumble.
On the Mikey Saints throw caused the fumble, which was called an incomplete pass in the field.
Right.
Did you see that as potentially the fumble when it happened? Because when it first happened, from my vantage point, I just saw a broken up pass kind of bouncing around. We were kind of talking, and all of a sudden the game stopped, and everyone was kind of around me was kind of wondering what's happening. We don't have the benefit of the call, right? So I was one of the first people in my section to go, oh, I wonder if they think it's a fumble, but I didn't remember who fell on the ball. Like, I just thought it was an incomplete pass. I wasn't even paying attention.
Yeah, so Greg, this to me is great coaching because, as you said, it could have looked like an incomplete pass, batted down by Sandwich still, end of play. But the ball's rolling around the surface, and Josh Wallace just picks the ball up like he's trained to do. It's automatic. I saw another play just like it later in the game where the ball was deflected, rolling around, and a Michigan offensive lineman just picked up the ball, even though the whistles blew. Because there is that little-known rule that even though the whistles are blown in a fumble-type situation, if it's immediately recovered by somebody right after the whistle, they'll say that is a recovery.
They'll give them the ball,
So Josh Wallace just did what he was trained to do. He just kind of picked up the ball very quickly just to make sure. And it ended up working out for him. This was not a dive for the football and 7 or 8 people jumping on top of it. Nobody went for the football, and Josh Wallace picked it up.
I feel like we've had more of these instances where people think the play is dead, but it's still going, like with runners and rolling on people and balls like this one, where you really have to kind of keep playing. And that's a heads-up play. So props to him. And again, with Mikey, he's just a special guy on this team. He ends up getting the MVP of the game.
In the 13-year history of the Big Ten championship game, a defensive player has won the award twice. Sanders still was the first. We're going to let our listeners think about who the second one might be, and we'll tell you a little bit later in the podcast.
Here's a hint. I voted for him.
Don't let me forget. I didn't know you had voting privileges.
I do, and I did for this, and guess what? I wouldn't have voted for Sanders so I didn't know he caused the fumble at the time when I was watching. I was watching from the stand, so probably wouldn't have been him, but I love it. So I got to say, Steve, I do feel a little more on this game because I feel a special tie to this team and Mikey, having been introduced by him to the team in fall camp. If you guys remember, we talked about in the podcast with my Little Brown Jug speech that I gave to the team. So I felt a little connection to him, to this team. And I do take a little tiny extra source of pride in this team winning the Big Ten championship, having been there at the beginning in camp. So I do feel part of it, and a little bit of pride, I got to say, man.
He is going to go down as one of the favorites.
Oh my gosh!
In recent Michigan history, that is absolutely for sure. Looking forward to the way he plays. He kind of reminds me right now of Jim Leonard at Wisconsin. Now, Sanders still was recruited, but Jim Leonard couldn't even get a Division I offer, walks on at Wisconsin, and then from there he does all these great things like become a 3-time All-American, played in the NFL for a decade, coaches 1 year at Wisconsin, immediately in year 2 he's a defensive coordinator, goes down as one of the best defensive coordinators in the last 5 years at Wisconsin. But my point is that St. Ristel is a great player, great mind. He'll get dinged in the draft for being undersized, but his future could be like Leonard's, whether he's still playing or potentially coaching.
And it's no secret now for those who listen, but just between us friends, he was kind of de facto just named captain. He was captain before there was a vote, and that was Harbaugh's kind of desire, not because he wouldn't have got it. It was actually the opposite. It was so obvious that he and Corum would be voted in. Harbaugh just said, no, they're captains, so vote on the rest. I think it's awesome, an awesome honor for him. The other big play moment for me was the Samaj Morgan punt, not just because it was a great punt return, okay? But more because we kind of took Iowa's best weapon, that ridiculous punter, which we joked about. And Steve, you revealed those incredible stats about how many punting yards they have this year. He took a punt from this phenomenal punter and flipped the field on. Probably should have scored, but ran out of gas. And just a remarkable play, which, again, was huge because you kind of expected to get beat by the punting game or beat by special teams or beat by something. And we flipped it on them, man. We flipped it on them.
Returning punts and kicks this year has not been Michigan's strength.
No.
A lot of fair catches, a lot of teams bouncing, playing it safe. But Samaj Morgan made 2 Iowa Hawkeye players miss with a little jiggle. And then he made another very good cut. And then after that, it was off to the races. So he almost made it. It was 87 yards. Biggest punt return in Big Ten championship history, by the way.
Did you see the guy who caught him and ran him down? Did you see what happened there?
No.
So this guy, number 4, Cohen Entriger, he's from Ypsilanti. So he was the wide gunner coming down. Missed him, but was flat out on his belly. Missed him right back when he caught the ball. He got up and ran. If you see the highlight, he's the guy who caught him on the other end of the field. It was a remarkable play. Of course, Michigan ended up getting the touchdown, but hats off to this kid, man. It was sweet. I didn't realize it at the time. I just know it looked like Samaj ran out of gas, but this guy's play was unbelievable. People are talking about it today. I saw some of this stuff on Twitter, so phenomenal stuff there.
So what does this all mean, Greg, in the aftermath? Let's go back towards the top and what this means for Michigan, despite the obvious 3 straight playoff appearances. What's your thoughts?
To me, the Big Ten title still means so much. This is number 45. It's never going away. In kind of the end of this current era of college football, we got it done. It also seems to have not silenced completely because there's still little comments and things, but amazingly, the sign stealing stuff, which no one could escape from, seems to have been like faded way in the background. Just incredible. Remarkable that the team's persevered. So much. Your thoughts?
The more this is going on and the more Michigan continues to win, the more this kind of goes in the background. Now, in the offseason, there's still going to be an NCAA investigation. And for now, it doesn't feel like the season is being taken away.
No, it's like a rock in a river that every win is getting covered with sediment and sand. And every time you win, like you go game by game by game, every big game they've won puts more doubt into how serious sign stealing might have or might have not helped Michigan. And so that's what you get here.
There's pictures floating around about Harbaugh pointing at a stunned-looking Tony Petitti. It's not necessarily what it implies. I saw a full-length video of what was going on, and the pointing, although it looks like it was being pointed at Petitti, the pointing was actually Jim Harbaugh requesting that Tony Petitti give the trophy to Zach Zinter.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've seen the full video from a different angle, and it's like Jim wasn't going to come up to the front. Tony was waiting. He reaches around Joel Klatt, the guy who's moderating the trophy presentation, to say, can you give the trophy? And then he points to Zinter. And Tony goes, yeah, I could do that. And then they immediately shake hands.
Yeah.
And it was brief. It was fun. I did this whole big entertainment thing for the pregame show talking about how Harbaugh's working with Ben Herbert, the strength and conditioning coach, working on his vice grip move, so he can hold on.
I know. We were all hoping for it, Steve.
Yeah, with the defensive line, closing the A gap and B gap and C gap so that Tony Petitti can't leave and do this big, long, drawn-out thing with a big perma-smile on Harbaugh's face. I mean, that is theatrics. It was said for fun in the pregame show. And now we've got these pictures floating around that looks like Harbaugh's, really after it. And I just, that's not exactly what really happened.
Yeah, of course, I'm sure it was a little awkward because sometimes Harbaugh's delivery is a little awkward. I, too, had a suggestion for a hand signal for Tony Petitti in the pregame show, Steve. It was a different one using a different finger than Harbaugh did. And that also didn't happen, although I saw a few in the stands, okay? A couple of one-finger salutes at the Big Ten at that moment.
I did get it right, though, that Tony Petitti would get the Roger Goodell, the Gary Bettman, and the Bud Selig boo just for being introduced to coming on stage. I mean, that was kind of an easy one. I mean, that is a layup. That is an out-pattern to Colston Loveland. That is how easy that prediction was. But there were a couple of things to kind of nitpick about a game in which Michigan won 26-0. I was kind of surprised by a couple of things like the drops.
Yeah, Loveland and Barner each dropped a ball that looked like it was right in their hands. Quality of the opponent, they're probably blocking and working a little harder in this one, but disappointing. We haven't seen, I can't remember Loveland dropping a ball, and I don't remember Barner offhand, and it looks like they both dropped one. Whatever. The guys are fantastic. Also looked like JJ missed a couple passes. He definitely did on a few guys. So not a few, a couple. Two maybe a couple not perfectly accurate. And I did hear more kind of chatter about his health. So we can get into that a little bit. What else did you see?
Oh, I'm anxious to learn if he's also missing open looks.
Oh, yeah, on the film.
It's either that or the receivers aren't getting open. Good to see Cornelius Johnson get a career-high 9 catches. He's averaging less than 3 per game.
Yeah, can I give, there's some karma, too, with the Slippery Noodle, because if you remember, Will Johnson's dad visited the Slippery Noodle. I know he did the first year. I think he did the second year. And, of course, Will Johnson had the 2 picks. Well, Cornelius Johnson's dad spent time up on the stage with Sam and Steve and did an interview, and then Cornelius had this big game, which was very cool to see. What about the pass rush? Because we did try to have some plays develop, and it didn't go so well.
Yeah, that was the thing that was kind of most of the passes that JJ completed were very quick throws to the outside or to the inside, the type of thing that it's a short pattern and you throw it on the break, and there's not much of a chance for a defender to get to it, especially when they're playing in zone. But when they did try to take more than a couple of seconds to have something develop, and that could mean a post corner route, that could mean not just a shallow cross, but a double move, things that take more time that you have to be in the pocket and to escape the pass rush. JJ wasn't escaping the pass rush. So again, I have to look at the film, see things from a full 22. I would recommend, if you're interested in that kind of thing, to check out Sam Webb and Al Borges and Vance Bedford on the Michigan Insider podcast, where there's videos and descriptions, because you'll learn more about that. I'll be one of those people that will look in on it too.
And I do wonder if there's some coaching there for JJ, because it looked like he tried to go backwards to escape a couple of times at least, and it didn't work, and lost another 8 yards. And credit to Iowa, right, for being disciplined and all that in their lanes, but you got to see that. And again, is it part of his health that maybe he's not as quick and as elusive that he thinks he is? I don't know.
Well, he's gotten away with it a lot over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And he's spun out, and then he went back further, and most people go down at that point for like a 15-yard loss, and then either throws an incomplete pass or maybe even throws a touchdown pass out of it.
Yeah.
But since, beginning of November, where he doesn't exactly look quite himself, he's not make that one move. It doesn't seem to be as fast. So that's something he's either going to recover from, and the great news is he's got about 3 or 4 weeks to be able to recover from whatever is ailing him, or he needs to rethink a little bit of his mindset.
Yeah, and that's huge, right? Because Will Johnson didn't play. We've got a few other guys banged up. But I do have one more question about strategy. Do you think McNamara and all kind of spilled the beans on, here's how you beat Michigan? Because we've had that a couple of times with former coaches or people related who know our system have done pretty well against us. So certainly Cade McNamara knows kind of how we run our offense, right?
And Cade McNamara, the competitor that he is going to dish everything he knows, and said so publicly that he was going to do that. So am I angry at Cade McNamara for doing it? No, he's just trying to help his team win. But folks, if you ever have an argument with people who call Michigan cheaters and sign stealers, just remember this is sort of the same thing. Whenever a player transfers to another school in conference, Cade McNamara and Eric All played on the Michigan roster in 2022. They have all of that knowledge up until the end of that 2022 season with them, and they're going to share that with their new team. Does that mean that I think players should be banned if their new team plays their old team? Of course not. So I think their phones should be confiscated so they have no more communication with their coaches or their teammates about the plays that he knows from his previous team? That would be ridiculous. So I would love, if it was just me, I would love to have McNamara and all in the truth tank. And what I would like to know is 2 things. How specific and intricate of the details did you share to their coaching staff and players? Because it's players too. Me on the sideline, when they do this and this 3 finger, that kind of means that.
They love to do that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, okay? But the second question is, how much did they believe it helped? Because it's one of 2 ways. Either you say it didn't help us that much at all, or it was so totally effective. But that would mean that without that knowledge, you're saying Michigan would have shut them out by what? 40?
Right.
50 points?
Right. Which is it?
Yeah. And so put them in the truth tank. How much did you share? How intricate was it? Get the truth out and then tell us, did it help?
Right.
Or no, it really didn't mean a lot.
Right. Did you study for the wrong exam like in Animal House where they had, they got the carbon copy out of the trash and it was the wrong one? Yeah, I don't know. And I know you mentioned like there's some like ho-hum, we only beat them 26-0. It didn't feel that way to me. It felt great. James Turner again coming through clutch, including a long field goal.
Another 50-yarder.
Fantastic, man.
I'm feeling better and better about the kicking situation every single week. Greg, about ready to go in the locker room when we come out.
What are we doing in the locker room? It sounds good. What are we doing in there? I don't know if I'm ready for the locker room. I like that, though. You should ask me about that. That's what we should call the halftime. Yeah.
Greg, are you ready for halftime? When we exit halftime, we'll come back and talk about all the personal stories that happened to us over the weekend. We'll also get into the playoff controversy, which finally happened between the committee. The new playoff system is 1 year too late, unfortunately, for Florida State. And earlier in the podcast, I talked about the 13-year history of the Big Ten championship game. A defensive player has won the award twice. Mike Sainristil was the second for Michigan, but the first, another Wolverine, Aiden Hutchinson in 2021, got the MVP. But right now, it's time to talk to our title sponsor, Nick Hopwood. So, Nick, we're heading into the fourth quarter of the season, and it happens to coincide with the fourth quarter of the year. What do you advise your clients to start doing as we prepare for 2024?
The biggest thing that comes to mind, Steve, is tax planning. So usually in November, around Thanksgiving, I'll meet with my CPA and figure out, how am I doing this year of the taxes? Am I going to get a big bill in April that I need to start planning for now? Or maybe I have a surplus and I can spend some of that money in my tax fund. That's the first thing that I think of in the fourth quarter.
So if you, the listener, came out better than expected at the end of 2023, maybe you want to take a look to see how much you have and consider buying a bowl trip either to Pasadena or perhaps Houston for the national championship. Or better yet, just call Nick Hopwood himself at 734-681-7575 and ask these questions about what you can do to maximize your money at the end of the year. That's peakwm.com online, peakwm.com, or call Nick himself at 734-681-7575.
Nick, thank you. Did not see Nick in Indianapolis. Hope to see him in the Rose Bowl. Hope you listen to Nick and save your money for the Rose Bowl trip that finally came. Not unlike the trip to Indianapolis that we were waiting for every year since 2011 that happened the last few years. Did you save your money for the Rose Bowl? Because here it is, and it's expensive. So we're going to be talking a lot about the Rose Bowl in the episodes to come. But first, we're not done with Indianapolis, Steve. The Slippery Noodle. Once again for the pregame show. Interesting. We had a couple incidents. We had an incident with the power.
No fighting. No fighting incidents.
No fighting. Huge crowd. But I was there early when the place opened, and I took a break and went back to the hotel, got my game gear on, all that stuff, came back to the Noodle, and I just had realized when I was walking out, man, it's dark in here. And it was really dark. Somehow the power went. Do we know what happened? I mean, it was out.
Crazy.
Was it the energy from the show sucked the grid down?
It seemed like it because the theme of the show started. And Ira's opening from the countdown to kickoff, previewing the game and having Doug Karsh's calls intermixed into it. Started off and about 30 seconds into it, all the TVs in the bar went out. The internal audio playing Ira's theme went out. And everybody went like you would expect, kind of deal. And then there was kind of some laughter. And immediately everybody thought we were the reason.
Well, sure. You got all that equipment up there.
And what I did fairly quickly was because we have like these giant windows in the back of us. And I took a look outside and I noticed the street light wasn't working. So whatever happened took out at least that corner. And I realized, okay, one, we didn't do this. That was like the good news. The bad news is, this isn't an internal error that can be fixed with a flick of the switch, down in the basement with the circuit. So now you're going to have to wait for the city of Indianapolis to come and repair it, which is what they did. And it took them 90 minutes. Meanwhile, we were still on the air. And the great thing was about that was that everything that we use was on battery. and we were fully charged. So we're always trying to plug into a system, but in case, we always have the battery charged and ready to go.
So is it like a satellite system? Like, how are you transmitting your audio?
So you would be transmitting the audio through the internet. Now, that is an interesting question, because you would think that whatever is controlling the Wi-Fi is hooked up to electrical power.
Correct.
And if it's unplugged, then you don't have the Wi-Fi boxes working. For whatever reason, the only power coming out of that place and out of the corner, to our knowledge, was us broadcasting. Now, if we were Notre Dame, we would get down on one knee, do the sign of the cross, and say, "Thank you, Lord," because that's a miracle. We would have a miracle that would eventually be authenticated 50 years down the road, and somebody would be pronounced a saint.
Right.
But
Mikey, perhaps.
In this particular situation, it's the University of Michigan, not exactly Notre Dame. I don't know why we were still broadcasting, considering that we needed to get there through an internet connection. But hey, the show was on the air. And then I looked at our battery and I started forecasting to Sam and Ira how long this battery is going to last. And I forecasted it would be a little bit over 2 hours in a 3-hour show.
That's right.
And that got them nervous a little bit. And we were watching the battery thing go down and down and down. I rely on a lot of notes on my computer. And I knew that battery was going to die before that too. So then I would be winging it completely, which is something Sam can do fantastically. I cannot.
I think you can better than you think, Steve. But anyway, can I say, though, so the guys from the Noodle came up and said, "Look, I got some bad news. We just heard from the city, and it's probably not going to be restored until 8:30 p.m. And he walked away, and within 30 seconds of that, and this was around 5:45 or whatever the time was, all the power came back on. So we were restored and back in business. So we did lose a few people who were like, well, they want to watch the games, they want to hang out. Also, the Noodle had to do like cash and like, you know. So it was hard.
Tough.
But we got by, and it made for an awesome end of the show with everything back up. I got up there and did a live version of This Week in Michigan Football History.
And you sounded great, by the way. I mean, that was, hey,
Thanks.
Live version, no 2 takes, 3 takes. You did it there, and you were into it. We felt your energy during that portion.
Well, I felt yours too, Steve. And of course, I brought my notes on paper because that's how I roll. Okay. I'm the IT guy, but I have a piece of paper. And I needed Steve's reading glasses to read my thing as we're preparing.
Right.
And I put them on my big noggin. And what happened, Steve?
They snapped in half.
The
glasses that I need for the show, you borrowed for 30 seconds, and they snapped.
Not in
half.
my sausage fingers. Not because I dropped them on the floor. Not because I was having too many drinks and mishandled them. No, I tried to squeeze them on my giant grape head, and they split. And Steve looked at me like I just ruined his show. He gave me the greatest face of disappointment. And like, how am I going to read? And like, dude, you did it. And I'm looking around for tape to fix the glasses. And all of a sudden I look over at Steve, and he's pulling a second pair out of his little reading glasses that he had. He had a backup pair with him. It was one of the funniest things, dude. It was great.
It's about preparation.
It was great.
You know, this is what people on network news and stuff, they just always try to think of the worst possible scenarios. And so, yes, I brought 2 pairs of glasses with me. By the way, those second pair snapped during the game.
Did they really?
I need new disposable readers that apparently break for no reason whatsoever.
I think both our heads are swelling with all of the audience and listener we're getting, Steve. I think metaphorically and literally, okay? Now, I did hear a couple of people say, it sounds like you and Steve were into the beers a little bit. We were into the beers a little bit, okay? Yep. But we were still professional, all right? Maybe a little fired up, okay?
I think I sound better after a couple of drinks.
Like Johnny Fever. You get stronger. The history gets into my soul after I have a few drinks. So, awesome trip. The Noodle was amazing. Thanks for everyone who stopped by and said hello. It was awesome. But I did finally make it to St. Elmo, Steve.
Yes.
Have you been before?
I have not, but I think Bill Raftery has a residence there.
Yeah. So it's multi-layered. Like, there are all kinds of rooms. There is a VIP entrance that I saw. Some of the guys from the Big Ten Network get swept into this VIP right from the street. But I had to go there. I managed to get a table, and I went right for the shrimp cocktail. Not what I thought. So I've heard about the shrimp cocktail all my life. I've never bothered to Google it. I just thought it was like a big shrimp cocktail like you get, at a restaurant or a club or whatever, where a little bowl with a bunch of shrimp around it with sauce in the middle or something to dip in. No. It looks like a little trophy. You can't even see the shrimp. They're covered in the sauce. So sorry if I'm ruining that for someone who's waiting to go to the Big Ten Championship. But the sauce is so like wasabi hot. And some of you are like, yeah, Dooley, we know. Okay. I was prepped for that. The guy says, have you had it before? I'm like, no. Okay. He's like, get ready. It's crazy, like horseradish, wasabi, hot. All right. It'll clear your sinuses. Okay, check. And I'm like, not worried at all. Oh, yeah. It's the real deal.
Once it hits your lips, it's so good.
It is super strong. And I know people say, well, you can get it at Costco, you can get it at this and that, but it was fantastic. It was really good.
Now, some people don't know that St. Elmo's is one of the finest places in Indianapolis to go eat.
Oh, as far as, it's a classic steak and, that kind of thing.
Every year during the NCAA tournament, we always hear Jim Nantz, Bill Raftery, and Grant Hill talking about being at St. Elmo's. Whether it's a first-round game or the last 4 teams playing in the final weekend.
Yeah.
Yes, would I want to go? Yes, I have looked at the menu online. I'm not going to St. Elmo's. It's just a little bit out of my price range.
Oh, Steve, you got to try it once.
For me.
Yeah.
For me, it's a little bit out of my price range. But anyway, hearing that you went and we're in a text string with maybe a dozen other people that you're going, and I said, get a picture, which you did. But then I responded, who takes a picture of their food in such a fine dining restaurant?
Yeah.
You should be removed, sir.
I did ask. I had my classic lid and a quarter zip on, and I asked, can I wear this? And you can wear whatever you want. I will say, like, those rules for restaurants have kind of gone out the window since COVID, and I think that's a good thing. I actually saw one of the ladies that we saw at Monty's, where we had that great time, was there eating alone. Her husband didn't make the trip. And so I ended up like finishing my steak and having a drink and just chatting.
Really?
She was in the table next to us at Monty. Steve is hearing this for the first time.
I am.
Yeah, so that was really cool. What else? Oh, guess who was in the bar? So they had this huge bar area. They had maybe a 60, 80-foot bar where if you don't have a reservation, that's where you can go and kind of muscle your way and get a table. Urban Meyer sitting in the bar area at one of the tables.
Alone?
No, I think it was his wife, but I don't Google.
Who knows these
I don't
days?
Google. Yeah, okay. But if you're in the bar area, so this is like a big, long, old school bar, okay? And there are just a million people there. You're going to sit right in the middle of the bar. You're kind of there knowing you're going to be seen, and people are going to come up to you, and you're going to take it on, and it's Michigan.
If you want to be anonymous, this is not where you sit.
Yeah. So he was ready for that team up north, the Wolverines, the rival, however, all those words he uses except for Michigan. He was ready for people to come up to him. No, Steve, despite my martini and maybe a few beers, I did not go up to Herb. I would have asked him if he at all considered the Michigan State job. I would have asked him that. And I probably would have paid him a compliment on how good he is on breaking down game film and all that stuff on the Big Ten Network, because I just think he does a great job. All the other stuff I wouldn't have brought up, but there were people kind of swooping in, circling in, people kind of having their drink and kind of peeking up and sneaking a picture of them, So there was that kind of going on. Yes, at the wonderful St. Elmo's.
It is interesting because there are some people you would think that would want to be anonymous actually do seek the attention. So
he leaned right into it for sure.
For example, I was told once that Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, came to see Rutgers play Michigan, not this year, but a number of years ago. And that he went to, of course, his name is Chris Christie, he went to Ruth's Chris. Apparently, he demanded to have the table in front of the big window that doesn't have any curtains on it so that people going down the sidewalk can actually see his mug inside the deal. That was a demand.
Okay.
That he'd be that visible. So it is kind of interesting when those things come out. Now, have I asked the governor, the former governor, is that true or not? No, but it's something I heard.
Very cool. I grabbed an interesting spot at the end of the bar where everyone kind of goes in and out of the restaurant if you're not like a super VIP. And oh my gosh, what a people watching. All the people kind of coming into the restaurant, everyone leaving. It was really a cool spot. Ran into some of the guys from On 3, like Chris Ballas and Clayton Fee and those guys. Saw Steve from Dallas and some of our friends coming in and out of there. And then, of course, Urban showed up. So it was a great spot to hang out. Glad I went. Finally made it to St. Elmo's. So that was wonderful. Steve, what else? One of my favorite parts. It was fun kind of waiting for Petiti, but he left so quick. We really didn't get our pound of flesh at the long, super long boo and the birds and the screaming, where if he had a little speech ready, we would would have crushed him.
Yes.
But he just, he was out of there, which was smart, I think. Oh, and by the way, what percent of that crowd was Michigan fans, do you think? I mean, it was a huge percentage to me. Like, it was, I don't know, 70, 80 plus percent. There was a good, loud Iowa contingent in the corner. From my perspective, it was heavy, heavy Michigan, way more than, say, 2 years ago. And I love that we can say that. Okay.
Tickets were a lot cheaper this year, by the way, to get to the our family paid hundreds of dollars for spectators to sit in that 600 level the day before this year's game, $37.
I think several reasons. Number one, I know that Iowa fans weren't out in force like they were before. I don't know if they were conceding. I don't know.
Conceding.
Okay. The anticipation of Michigan fans that we're probably going to win this and go on to bigger, better things, and it's going to be a big investment, whether it's the Rose Bowl or not. I think there was that. I hate to say it, but for a lot of people, this is the third time in again, a 2-year span that we've been there. I've done it. I did it. You had to be there that first year, right? There was a different, and even the vibe before, and I'm not saying it was an awesome vibe. It was more relaxed, though. Like, I remember 2 years ago, the first Iowa game, it was like a coronation. Like, people were loud, and we're going to get this game. It was more of a chilled, relaxed, like, quiet, humble, a little arrogant, we got you. You know what I mean?
Well, for one thing, the Iowa's offense is so anemic.
Yeah.
And they're without their best players. And the SP Plus rankings came out. There's a 125 place difference between Iowa's defense and their offense. You can't go beyond 132 because there's 133 teams in Division I. It's 125. And so Iowa's defensive stats were similar to Michigan's, but some of it was probably propped up because they're playing in the worst division in football, the Big Ten West. And I don't think there was much of a doubt at all that Michigan was going to win it. But be that as it may, you got your degree in business. It's something called the law of diminishing returns, doing it year after year after year. There was Citrus Bowl fatigue 20 years ago. Michigan always going to Orlando and playing the Citrus Bowl, and it didn't matter whether they were playing a top 10 team or not. It's like, done Orlando, been there, done that. They were almost willing to accept to say, let's go to the Alamo Dome.
Yeah, for
a less worthy game that's not on New Year's Day even, just so that it's something different. And there was some Citrus Bowl fatigue.
No, I get it. I just if you can tell in my voice, and I think in yours, Steve, bring it on. I can't wait for your number 4 if we go again. So just very grateful, very grateful. And there was a moment that I found special, and maybe you didn't hear it in the press box, but when Harbaugh was up there, he said, we got a little saying in my family, and everyone knew where he was going with this. And he did and we like to say, who's got it better? And he did who's got it better than us? And my nephew and his friends had come down, because you can kind of move down at that point, down right by the field with me. And we all just screamed, nobody. And the whole place just lit up. And that was, for me, like a really, really cool moment.
I could hear that on television.
Yeah.
Watching it Sunday night, that as good as it sounded on television, it was probably 5 times better in person.
It was, like, everyone screamed as loud as they could. Nobody. It was like a rock concert moment. So to me, that was almost like the end of a chapter, that moment right there for the fans. And that's when everyone kind of started to disperse and take off. And it was really cool. Steve, you had a few adventures in travels. Did you get everything sorted out there at the night, or what happened? Do you want to share any of that?
Yeah, very briefly. For me, I booked a hotel. It was a little bit on the cheap side. And I know how hotels work. If it is busy and they oversell, they start going through the process of who can we start eliminating. Look, it's, midnight. This person hasn't showed up to check in. There's somebody right in front of me, a walk-in. They're going to give the money to walk in and then still charge you for not showing up. So I did a preemptive call, like around halftime. Maybe it was the third quarter. It says, look, I paid for this room. I have a reservation. I am showing up. Don't give my room away. And they said, oh, we already did. and said it in such matter of fact without apology.
Thanks for calling.
It was like, no worries, you're already unbooked. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm calling to say don't give away. No, we gave it away a long time ago. And it's like Seinfeld, I had a reservation.
Wow,
Clearly you don't understand the process of taking a reservation.
Right.
And eventually, I never raised my voice, but I was getting to try to get them to explain to me how you could just give away my room. And they just hung up on me.
Yeah. The secret to the reservation is keeping and holding the reservation, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you book this on TikTok or something or some weird website?
I bought it at a very well-known third party.
Okay.
People will hear about it later, not publicly here on this microphone. As it turned out, Sam Webb, partner on the broadcast, allowed me to stay with him. And that was fantastic. I just had to realize that Sam wasn't going to go to bed till 5 a.m. And that's just because that's how hard Sam works.
Good thing we won, Steve, but that would have been painful. I'm sure you were still full of adrenaline from the game, though.
I was, but about 3 a.m., I was starting to ready to take a nap inside the press box.
Well, the professor and junior professor were a few blocks away in king-size beds, sleeping soundly. Steve, while you were working through this, I'm sorry. I got pulled over on the way back on I-69 on Sunday morning.
It's about time.
Yeah. So I'm going along, Steve, in the middle of traffic.
Yeah.
And I did pull my phone out to adjust Waze. I did something on Waze.
Checking for cop patrols online?
And a minute later, I look behind me. There's a cop. He comes up. He goes, yeah, you were doing 79 in a 70. I go, yeah. In Michigan, if you're not going 80,
I'm sure that argument
you're
didn't work
causing
well.
problems. No, I just said, yes, sir. I was definitely doing that. I don't dispute that. We were just getting back from the big game. He said, what big game? I explained. He asked who won. I explained.
He didn't know.
He said, I said, I'm here with my son. We're heading home. He goes, slow it down and let me go. And the whole thing was about 90 seconds, our interaction. And I was back on the road, Steve,
well, good
going
for you.
78. From then on, 78.
My son has a saying, and he's 19, and as far as I know, he hasn't been pulled over, but he said something like, if you're over 8, you're great. If it's 9, you're mine. I don't know where he got that from. But yes, he kind of used that expression on me one time.
All right. Well, in Michigan, if you're going over 10 over, you're fine. If you're 11, maybe you're mine. I don't know.
Isn't there some sort of rule that, like in Michigan, like if the majority of traffic is going 20 over,
yeah,
they're not going to pull every one of you over. But if you're the only one going a certain speed, yeah, then you maybe.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So anyway, but I did see that there were a bunch of people getting pulled over, like all over the place. So they clearly had something going on. Someone's listening and going, yeah.
Traffic cops who listen to the podcast, let us know when you rate and review them. Tell us what we said that is factually incorrect.
So, yeah, he let me go, and I just went to Michael. I just said, guilty as hell, free as a bird. I said, you just gotta charm him. No,
wow,
the guy was cool. I honestly would have been really surprised if he wrote me a ticket, but he pulled me over. So we got to get to, there are a couple Big Ten notes, not involving Michigan or Iowa. Steve, a couple of changes at Ohio State.
Yeah, Ryan Day essentially fired Kyle McCord. He did decide to fire his defensive coordinator, and why would you this year? He actually did pretty good. He's his own offensive coordinator. Somebody had to take the fall, and Ryan Day, not literally, but somewhat figuratively, fired Kyle McCord.
Well, that's funny because that's what we said we thought was going to have to happen, is that someone's going to have to take the hit for this. I didn't think it'd be a player. He fired Kyle McCord.
The fans certainly helping him out the door. Kyle McCord went to the transfer portal on Monday, as well as a number of Ohio State players, including backup running back Evan Pryor, who I don't think has played the last two Michigan-Ohio State games, but is really an important cog in their rushing attack. And Julian Fleming is a five-star receiver. Now, he was the guy who fumbled the ball on the second last play of the game that was recovered by his teammate, Emeka Egbuka.
Yeah, clear fumble.
I don't think Ryan Day fired Julian Fleming, but I mean, it was a mistake that the last two plays were firing the guys involved.
I think Urban gave the order at St. Elmo's in the bar on both of these things. Is that possible?
Would be. Now, okay. So now the question is, Some people are saying, well, I guess it's going to be Devin Brown. And I'm like, yeah, Devin Brown for your game in the bowl against Missouri. But for the future, they're going to reset the quarterback and they're going to go through the transfer portal to get it. Because one of the top recruits in 2024, a guy named Air Nolan, is a highly recruited player, but he's an incoming freshman coming in next year. That's a little too much to ask for. But you can get a guy from the transfer portal. And let me tell you who also went on the transfer portal over the last few days. Dylan Gabriel, the outstanding Oklahoma quarterback. When you look at an Oklahoma game, they're firing up 60 points per game under that offense. So there's that. And then you have Dante Moore for UCLA, although a lot of people are actually pegging Dante Moore more to Michigan.
Yeah, I saw he's on the list.
As a potential. The Pac-12 breaking up and the number of vacancies that are going in the Pac-12 is just absolutely wild. You got Cam Ward out of Washington State, Oregon State's DJ Uiagalelei, and then you got Duke's Riley Leonard. There are some openings in the old Pac-12, new Big Ten that could just transfer within. Michael Penix has gone out of Washington.
Oh, right.
Bo Nix has gone out of Oregon. Uiagalelei just could decide to play with his brother, who plays defense for the Ducks. But there's going to be a lot of vacancies, and I think Ohio State's probably going to turn to an established transfer quarterback who's absolutely outstanding. And there's no reason to think that they would get that quarterback unless somebody is so dialed in that they just don't think they can ever beat Michigan again. Quarterback doesn't want to go into that situation. And, of course, there will be more and more rumors about Ryan Day and potentially going elsewhere himself.
Yeah, and I saw the Spartan fans are slobbering themselves over this Oregon State highly recruit guy that looks like he's going to follow Jonathan Smith to MSU.
And this is not the starter because that's Uiagalelei.
Yeah, this is the guy named
backup.
Yeah, this is a guy named Aiden Childs, who's a tall, dual threat, 4-star quarterback, and he looks like he was next, and he was the guy. He was the guy in waiting, and obviously has a connection with Jonathan Smith, and everyone's saying he's going to be at Michigan State, and Michigan State fans are excited. I can tell you, in fact, Steve, when I packed up here on Twitter, he was trending. Locally, everyone like buzzing around the possibility. It is a new world, my man.
Unlike Urban Meyer going to Michigan State, I can see this happening. I mean,
yeah.
You're recruited by Jonathan Smith. There's obviously an opening. Michigan State's losing their top 3 quarterbacks. They're all gone. So he could take the job immediately if Jonathan Smith, wants him to have it, and I can't see a reason why not. And he would just be able to go there, and there they go from day one. An electrifying quarterback that could be a difference maker in games, a lot better than what Michigan State's record is. Anything is going to help. Of course, he's going to need an offensive line to protect, so that's something that Jonathan Smith's going to have to work on. He's going to have to work on the weapons, too. I mean, it all sounds good in the moment, but there's also the running back situation, the receiving situation, the offensive line situation at Michigan State. You need all of these things if you're going to be a good quarterback. That's one of the reasons why Dante Moore is leaving UCLA. Great passer, good team, except offensive line absolutely destroyed that young man. And he is bruised and battered because of it. And Dante Moore is looking for to go to a team whose offensive line is fairly decent and might actually keep him upright.
Yeah, so, I mean, you'll have dominoes fall, right? If this new quarterback's and someone that's going to leave, I expect Oregon State, that carcass to get picked, and a lot of those guys to probably end up at State, to follow Jonathan Smith. I know that geography is a little weird, so that may be something that prevents it, but it didn't stop guys from Florida to go to the state of Florida to follow in prime to Colorado. So we'll see. We'll see here.
The mass exodus is happening this week. And then what you need is an established coaching staff that isn't going anywhere, because now is also the time all the way up until February, where assistant coaches and head coaches make their decisions about who's moving on at both levels, and then players will react to what they see. And if they need to make a decision early, they're going to see what is in their hand. What's that old saying called?
Bird in the hand.
The bird in the hand versus the two in the bush, right?
That's right.
And Michigan State might have an advantage that way. But when the first domino falls, then the others will follow after that.
Behind all this is NIL. And expectations of NIL. Matt Rule from Nebraska basically came out, not even basically, he said that if a good quarterback is worth between $1 and $2 million in transfer portal. So you've got all that going on. And
unless you have culture.
Right.
And if you have a culture and you have a history of winning, like the Wolverines do, they may not necessarily need to spend, and it's not them, it's the NIL collectives and figuring out how much money they had to raise. It won't be as much.
Yeah, and sending guys to the NFL, right? A track record to do that, a strength program. So a new coach at a new team has a lot to work, and you have to establish all those relationships with all the people and families and all the people that give to NIL and build those relationships back. It's so much work, but if you do it right, you can win, and we'll see what happens here. So what else? We got to touch on at least, Steve. I know we're deep into this podcast already, but we got to talk about what happened with the playoff selection.
It is absolutely a huge story, so we can't ignore it. Florida State became the first Power 5 football team to go undefeated and not make the 14 playoff. And the outrage is not just in Tallahassee. It is all throughout the country. They see this as wrong. They see this as the Godfather, Nick Saban, St. Nick, once again politicking his way and getting his team in. And it's certainly going to be exciting to see Michigan versus Alabama as opposed to, well, Michigan should whip Florida State. Why even bother pay attention to it?
Kind of like TCU.
But there was a lot of sympathy for Florida State and their story. There's a lot of mistrust with the College Football Playoff Committee and the networks involved. And here we are 48 hours later, and there's a lot of people screaming.
Whatever the choice was, there weren't enough spots. And I get that, Steve. But I am one of them who, if I were on the committee, I'll just flat out say it, I would have stood there and fought hard that in my criteria, and I know they have all the criteria, but it seems like you could use any of those to argue this case for Florida State. I get it. It included language about a hurt player. But to me, an undefeated Power 5 team gets a golden ticket straight through, and you give them the opportunity to try to make it work, even if you lose your quarterback. No team is the same team that started the season, including Michigan. And I would have made the committee come down to Texas and Alabama. And by the way, I would have listened to Alabama over Texas despite the win in Tuscaloosa that Texas had early in the season. It would have drove Texas fans. I would listen to the argument if you want to keep the SEC in. But to me, it would have been about those two teams, and I probably would have picked Texas. And I know that would have been a bad look to not have the SEC in it after all this year. So you could persuade me, Alabama. But again, most people would go, well, you can't because Texas beat Alabama, and that then throws the regular season out. I get that too. That's why I would probably go with Texas. But I do think they got screwed. I think they deserve the chance to try to put the pieces together to figure out how to get the team on the field that's going to beat, say, Michigan, as it probably would have been. I had a very good hunch when the rankings came out and they revealed the third team that it was Texas, that it was going to be Alabama.
6 teams deserve to be in it.
Yeah.
And those 6 resumes would have been good enough in other years. In some years, Georgia would have fallen to 3rd or 4th. FSU can be angry. Let them vent. I understand it. Everyone would have a reason to be angry, though. I mean, Texas had wanted Bama. I don't think you could have had Bama without Texas.
I understand.
And clearly, since Georgia dropped so much themselves from 1 to 6, I mean, if Michigan had lost to Iowa, they would have met the same fate.
I agree. Michigan would have been out under this scenario, and that would have sucked.
Some of the outrage is directed at the SEC that always produces champions. The idea that they don't get to go in was never going to happen. They've had an automatic bid throughout this entire process. And the most deserving SEC team was Alabama because they beat Georgia in the championship.
I know.
You kind of had this feeling that they were going to go in it, and the way some people were reacting to it is that the fix was in. And Florida State, which hasn't been the power that they once were, when they were in the top 5 in the AP poll for like some 20 years straight running, they didn't have that cloud anymore. When you look at the schedules, and one of those 3 teams that was going to get screwed did play the way the committee wanted them to play a tough opponent in the non-conference schedule. They did that. And they weren't rewarded for it. Or maybe Alabama was rewarded for it, beating Texas. Imagine if it was Florida State that played Texas, and Texas went on to win their championship.
Right, we had this.
I think Florida State would be in, and possibly Alabama would be out. I guess Florida State booked the wrong SEC team.
Yeah,
or should have gone with the Big 12.
I do think these are human beings, and the ACC is the easiest conference to punish. They have the weakest voice out of all of these. They never would have heard of the end of it if Alabama didn't get in. from Weinbaum, as someone calls him on the way home on the radio, or any of these other people. I just think that it was the easiest,
right.
The easiest option to disappoint was Florida State. And by the way, a team that had zero sympathy with all this talk of private, equity money and all these buyouts, and everyone's like, who are these guys? What are they up to? And now everyone's kind of like, yeah, okay, kind of sympathize for them. But obviously that's about the coaches and players.
So can you imagine the message this would be sending the ACC if there wasn't a 12-team playoff next year? Imagine a scenario where we're still under a 14 playoff and an undefeated ACC team was not allowed in. Florida State was making noise about getting out of the ACC before the season started. This would have ended it. And Florida State would be angry at everybody. They would be Florida State versus everyone at that point because they'd be angry at the ACC for not getting paid, and they'd be angry at the selection committee for not taking the ACC seriously. And if the world thinks the ACC isn't serious, then there shouldn't even be an ACC at this point. And a lot of people think it's going to come down to about 2 power conferences anyway.
Well, and if you believe that, Texas and, of course, Washington, where are they going to be next year? They're going to be in the SEC, Texas, and, of course, Washington, the Big Ten. So next year is going to be out of one of those conferences. And if you think of where all the power resides, that's where it is. So if you are the ACC in Florida State, you're going, oh, my God, this whole thing is rigged. Yeah.
I may be assuming that the ACC is going to exist next year because last year at this time I would, of course, said the Pac-12 would exist. The ACC, especially if you're the number 2 team, has to be a little fearful.
Yeah.
Because in this 12-team playoff, and you got to have that group of 5 in there that's always going to be, the number 12 team, and you have the conference champions, there are actually very few wildcard spots to be played out. If you think there's going to be 5 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff in 2024, you're sadly mistaken. You're probably not even going to get 4. You might get 3 if it's worthy enough. The SEC might get 3 if it's worthy enough. The way the ACC champion just got hosed, you have to wonder the ACC is going to get their ticket punched for being in the 12-team playoff as an automatic. But is there going to be a room for a second ACC team?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is there going to be room for a second Big 12 team that loses a Texas and Oklahoma? We'll take your champion, and that's probably about it.
Yeah.
And we'll leave the others for the SEC and the Big Ten. And once that story gets told and figured out, then all of those other teams in that conference that feel that they're either number 1 or number 2 are going to go, how can I join the Big Ten or the SEC? What do we have to do?
Yeah, we'll see it. I'm with you. A lot of things change next year. It would have been a nice year to have this because this is the scenario that the 12-team playoff helps. Maybe it doesn't fix because in this scenario, they would have played in the first round at home, which is a decent consolation prize. But they still would have felt a little anger, but they would have the opportunity to prove it on the field, which they don't. So how this plays out in the bowls, and you can't say, well, Georgia, if they crush Florida State in the bowl, see, everybody, they didn't deserve it. You can't really say that because we don't know who's playing for Georgia.
Exactly.
We don't know who's playing for Florida State. We don't know who's playing this game.
These games,
Yeah.
all the good players are going to be gone. It's now accepted. They're no longer being shunned for looking out for themselves and their NFL draft status. Or some of those players, I need to get in the transfer portal right now and find another team to play with. You remember Pitt and Michigan State playing in the Peach Bowl a couple of years ago. All the star players were gone from that one, and I expect that to happen in the Cotton Bowl. I expect that to happen in the Orange Bowl. And the winner of that game is really not going to tell their fan base that they're better than the other team on the field and their program is better because of it. It is definitely a glorified exhibition. It is time for the junior varsity and the second stringers to prove themselves as first-string players.
Which can be fun.
It can be fun for your individual local rooting interest.
Yeah.
But the idea that, hey, based on that 2024 Georgia-Florida State game, see, better program here.
That's right.
It has no juice. It has no clout. So,
no, it doesn't.
But the game that does have clout is Michigan and Alabama. And let's just set the scene here because the ramifications can be pretty negative on each side for a loss. Michigan, could they possibly go 3-0 and lose a semifinal in 3 straight years? And if Alabama loses, is it yet another sign that Nick Saban from the perch of college football dynasties, maybe one of the best dynasties ever, could actually be eroding in front of our own eyes?
I have an idea, Steve. Why don't we spend the next few weeks previewing the Rose Bowl, talking about our plans? And by the way, we didn't get it to today, but we got to get into a little history of how teams were selected to be champions, because to me, it's kind of fascinating, and it overlaps with a lot of things I teach in my class, how that whole idea of determining a champion kind of came to be, how we got to the situation that we just had this last weekend. There's some awesome Rose Bowl history. You guys know it's called the Granddaddy of Them All. You probably know that Michigan was a part of that. We can get into that and anything else, man, much more.
I'm going to the Rose Bowl. It'll be my first time ever, and this is a bucket list thing. And I started wondering after all these years, and Brady Hoke, Rich Rod, whether I get that opportunity.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I plan on going to. This will be my 5th trip, Steve, and it never gets old. And the scene there never gets old. When the sun sets over the San Gabriel Mountains, bring a jacket. By the way, pro tip, gets a little chilly once the sun dips behind the mountains. You wouldn't think it. But it's fantastic, man. You will love it. And we will talk about our plans and our game plan and maybe even do something special from Pasadena if we have the means to do that.
We're working on that. Let's make a date, though, for next week, the next podcast on The Professor and the Pundit, brought to you by Nick Hopwood at Peak Wealth Management. Greg, as fun as always, but I think some of it has to do with Michigan winning its 3rd straight Big Ten championship.
Winning and winning and winning and winning championships and making history right before our eyes. I love it. Let's keep rolling.
Michigan back-to-back-to-back Big Ten champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.